Welcome to program Pulse and Dance. I'm Valentina Kozlova, founder of VKDF and VKIBC. And let's get started. Welcome to Pulse and Dance. Today it's my pleasure to introduce Richard Chen See, former principal dancer, staging director, licensing director for Paul Taylor, an educator, and much more. Hi, Richard.
Hello. It's great to see you.
Nice to see you. Richard and I, we met many years ago.
We won't say how long.
Yeah, we won't say. But so can you tell our audience? So you were born outside of this country or in this country?
I was actually born on the island of Jamaica in the West Indies, a little bit before we met. And
Good.
And I came to the United States via England, and I had started my ballet training in Jamaica in the West Indies, and then I got to go to England and I started my professional career there. And then ultimately, I couldn't get a visa to stay as they were just at that advent of the European Union. And so because I was a member of a Commonwealth country at that point in time, I did not get precedent over getting a visa. So I returned home to Jamaica and I applied for my green card. And amazingly, in those days, I was actually able to get one without too much trouble. It took me about a year and a half.
But not bad.
Not bad, exactly.
Yeah.
See, so I ended up in the United States and I've been here for a good 40 years.
But 5 decades you were actually in the dance industry.
Absolutely.
30 years you were dancing.
Yep.
30 years. 15 years with Paul Taylor.
And then 15 years prior to that.
So where did you dance?
So I started out as an apprentice for Northern Ballet Theatre when it was in Manchester in England. And then I ended up being an apprentice for London Festival Ballet, which is now English National. And then I came to the United States and I was freelancing. And I ended up doing a number of projects, one with Jeffrey Holder for the New World Festival of the Arts in Miami. And I got the job with Oakland Ballet. And Oakland Ballet in California had an amazing repertory, and it introduced me to the Americana ballets. So I got to work with people like Eugene Loring and Agnes DeMille. Wow. And Ruth Anna Boris doing things like Cakewalk. And I only did inconsequentials for Agnes, but she later staged Fall River Legend for Oakland Ballet. But then I was also the first profiteer in Green Table for Oakland Ballet. It was only the third production that had been done by an American company. And Anna Marquardt was still alive, Kurt Jost's daughter. Kurt had passed away in 1979 and I learned it in 1983.
Okay. So, but your basic training probably was classical, right?
It was a combination of classical and Afro-Caribbean folk dance. Growing up in Jamaica and the West Indies, we have a long tradition of Afro-Caribbean dance. And so it was very much a part of my movement vocabulary. Though in the days when I was training, I would be scolded for sneaking out to go and take contemporary and modern classes, away from the ballet conservatory.
Understandable. But in London Festival Ballet, which is English National, you were an apprentice in obviously
in classical ballet,
right?
yes. And Northern Ballet Theatre at that point was a very classical company, and they were under Robert de Warren, who ended up going to Sarasota. He went to Florida.
Yeah, but between he was in Milan.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, because when he invited me to dance in Milan, actually it was an interesting story. So he invited me to dance in Milan, guest performances with Sam Giselle and at La Scala and some of Roland Petit Blue Angel.
Yes.
And so when I arrived, there was Elvinelli staging something, Roland, and myself. So three of us were like three musketeers in the same dressing room. And because Roland brought, well, I was already contracted as a main character, like lead dancer in Roland's ballet. But he also brought his own dancers from his own company, Mian, because he preferred them over Italian dancers. And dancers went on strike. and it was like Elvin and Roland and me every day will come and just talk and sit and whatsoever. Unfortunately, they canceled Roland, Italian, so they canceled Roland. Elvin Ellie also left. And I said, what do I do? Well, you done Giselle. so I ended up doing like whatever, 6 Giselles. And so I thought, well, I love Italy, but it's dangerous because there's always strikes somewhere.
Yes, it's
right.
It's an environment that, we often project tours and say we'll believe it when it happens. Because it's very easy to have a tour canceled right at the last minute, a lot of the time because of a strike.
Yeah.
But I switched over to modern dance while I was in California. After I left Oakland Ballet, I got picked up by a company called ODC San Francisco, which is now called, I believe, ODC Dance. They started out as Oberlin Dance Collective at Oberlin College. And so they had moved west and they had formed this small contemporary company. And that was sort of my real introduction to becoming an American modern dancer. I had had some exposure to modern dance through the ballet company at Oakland Ballet because at that time, the National Endowment of the Arts had started a program of providing funding to bring modern choreographers into ballet companies. And so I worked with a couple of modern choreographers who were doing their own work, and it was a fascinating process because in ballet, I had always been working on repertory work where, it's established choreography that was done on a different dancer who may no longer be alive, and you had to find an interpretation within the structure of the choreography. Modern dance and having work created on you was such a different experience. It's like all of a sudden, like, no, we don't want to see a glissade and a jeté. We want you to slide across the floor and change legs. So, kind of breaking those rules at first was terrifying. I was like, oh, okay. Yet I had found that I really wanted to just perform. And the easiest form of performing for me was movement.
So what made you to go this direction, modern and contemporary? What love of movement, love of freedom, love because you are the first one that it's created on you?
A combination. I would say that, when we become classical dancers, you always think by the time I'm 29 years old, if I'm not a principal dancer, I have to have another career. So I was in my mid-20s and going, I wonder what my next career will be. And I did want to explore other things. But immediately I had left Oakland Ballet, I was like, oh, how do I make a living? And so I went and did these auditions for these modern companies. And in California, they were very interested in this idea of pedestrianism. And I didn't know what that meant. I'd been like a ballet dancer and a trained, Afro-Caribbean folk dancer from I was like 7 years old. So the idea of movement as just simply being a person I used to go and take aerobics classes. I would put on trainers and sneakers and go to aerobics classes and just imitate everybody there, trying to find what I thought Americans imagined was pedestrian. And eventually I found my own way of like, oh, I acknowledge this is how I walk. And learning to be an individual by simply being yourself within movement was the thing that fascinated me about modern dance. I think the other thing that fascinated me about it was being able to portray yourself or just everyday people, which is often the context within which, you know, even if we were doing historical pieces, like about Virginia Woolf and her characters or things like that, which I did at OTC, it was about being a real person. It wasn't necessarily about something ethereal or something abstract. And my longtime coach was Christopher Gable in England. And he had always said to me the thing that he loved about working with people like Macmillan and Ashton was the drama and the characterization, less so the technique of dance, even though he was brilliant. And I think I picked up that love of character from him. So for me, modern dance was an opportunity to both discover who I was as a person in movement, and also to find the craft that it took to not have an understood vocabulary that we do in classical ballet, but to actually be developing new vocabulary and new ways to perform gesture and how gesture reads in different ways. And ending up with Paul Taylor's company was perfect for me. You know, it's musical, it could use all of my technical strength, but everything we did was about seeing a human person dancing, moving, expressing an idea or an environment or just a mood. But you were always going to be a person in Paul Taylor's work.
So, well, you just explained a very interesting way that what did you get from Paul Taylor? How did you find working with Paul Taylor?
Paul Taylor, it wasn't for me. I understood why, but I had the privilege of having worked with other people, other creative geniuses, you know, being in the room with, well, just like Massine or, you know, Agnes de Mille. People often call them demanding. I thought they were just exacting. They knew what they wanted. Paul was not a very verbose person. He would give you an idea, or he'd put on music. I mean, every process was different, so it wasn't like formulaic. But what you were doing was learning what he didn't like. And he would sort of look away or look at somebody else, or he'd say, you know, that just doesn't work. And you would be left with this challenge to figure out what was he thinking. Because he wouldn't tell you, you know, and you didn't want him to get angry.
Right.
So you just tried more and more things. And he always worked with his own dancers.
Mm-hmm.
When he was commissioned for work, he would create it on his company, and then the work would get set outside, and then he would look at the work on the other company. So for us, it was about learning to pick up the cues of what he wanted. I always joked about the fact, and it's somewhat true, when he was working on a comedy, he was often very hard on us, and he almost seemed mean and angry all the time. And I came to the understanding that it's because comedy is hard to know whether or not it's going to land on an audience. And so he was, I think, probably very nervous about whether or not comedy was going to work. But then he'd be doing a dark work, and asking us to, like, you know, tear our hearts out and be exposed, and just places and vulnerability that you don't normally do in public. And he would be the sweetest person in the world to us, because he knew how hard we were working and just how vulnerable we were. So I think he was very aware of what he was asking us to do in service of what he was picturing in his head.
Yeah, I never met Paul Taylor. I mean, I've seen, of course, his works. It's a combination that, when I was in Bolshoi, Grigorowicz was precise, but there were some other choreographers that gave you room to grow, that kind of scene, so you have to fit yourself into character, but exactly what you feel. However, Grigorowicz also, like, his famous works were created at the time, very famous dancers, but he took from them.
Yes.
So that was very interesting. But speaking of comedy, I kind of feel what you just said, because I was not, besides classical ballets, more like dramatic ballets, and I was very comfortable. And then I had to do filming in Switzerland, actually Germany, but I rehearsed in Switzerland, of La Fille My Garder, Shirley. And I mean, it's like, you know, the girl is mischievous, Lisa, and all of it. And then it comes to last act, when it's like a pantomime, like funny pantomime. And I remember this pantomime fell on a night before I was supposed to, you know, go back to the US. And I looked what they filmed, and I really hated it. I hated myself, and I looked, and I said, because it was difficult for me, like drama, all of that. I'm good at and I said, no, I don't like it at all. I would like to refilm in the morning, like 8 o'clock in the morning next day.
Right.
And they tried to convince me that I was good, and I said, no, I wasn't. And so I have no idea how much I cost to the studio.
But they refilmed it.
They refilmed, and I looked and I said, well, yeah, I guess I'm okay now. And so it turned to be okay,
Yeah.
but in my mind, because I was so accustomed to be a drama, tragedy, dying,
Right.
suffering, all of that. So comedy, I found was, at the time, now I'm okay.
Yeah.
At the time, I found was more difficult, actually.
Range is hard. And that's what I loved about being coached by Christopher Gable, was that he believed in the acting. He believed in action and reaction. And so in all of it, like in the pas de deux, what you are attempting to do is to respond to the action. That's what makes it dynamic and spontaneous.
It's wonderful.
Yeah.
So Richard, you are a licensing director for Paul Taylor. And so you obviously you give license, but do you also do staging of some other works?
Yeah, so the way that licensing, so to be clear, I'm the licensing director for Paul Taylor's works. I'm not sort of the general licensing director for everything that needs a license.
Right, yeah.
And when I was still dancing in the company, around about 1999, Paul invited me to restage some of his works for Taylor 2, which was a smaller company of 6 dancers, 3 men and 3 women. The primary company of Paul Taylor Dance Company at that time was 8 men and 8 women, and it still is. So some of their repertory was a reduction that Paul oversaw. And it became my job in sort of that year to really sort of do about their touring repertory of about 12 dances. I got through 9 of them because I only had 6 weeks in which to do it. But I felt like that was his trial by fire for me. like, oh, let's see whether or not he can do this. I think he can do this, but let's see if we can. So I retired from the company in 2008. I retired from performing, and I had known a lot of people outside because I'd worked with other companies who then said, oh, well, if you have access to Paul Taylor's work, would he let you stage the work? And so I started staging the work, and I have staged probably about 10 or 11 different pieces of Paul's. And I am amongst a core of, I would say, about 20 of us who have known Paul's repertory. Mm-hmm. And we were very lucky with Paul's work as a repertory company that the company kept alive the successful works. So we were doing works from 1956, 1962, 63, 64, 65, really every single decade while he was creating work. And we got to know it intimately, and we got to know the distinctions of each of them. So I brought that to the ability to stage his work and understand the bigger perspective, the designs, how the lighting works with it, how it works with music, Paul's patterning, and all of that goes into staging work. So after Paul passed away in 2018, the idea of someone to oversee the, I don't know a good way to say, quality control of the integrity of the work mm-hmm. became kind of necessary for his foundation, because before Paul passed away, you just went to Paul and said, do you like this? Do you not like this? What do you want? Afterwards, it became more of how important is this legacy work and how it's done. And the foundation believed that it was necessary to not just preserve it, but to make it actively a part of today's vocabulary, dramatic and dance-wise, in the industry. So I was brought in to form a division of the foundation, which oversees the contracting, the vetting of companies, the productions, and to invite different alumni to stage works. Mm-hmm. And so I also am asking, what do you want Paul's work to do for you? Is it for your dancers? Is it for your audiences? Is it for education? Is it because a work particularly spoke to you as a dancer and you may have done it? There are many different reasons why. And what we want to do as a foundation is to fulfill the concept that works of art are built in their own time and period, but they speak beyond that.
Oh yeah, I agree. Yeah, it's fantastic. Yeah, it's really fantastic. So that comes my next question, because as an artist, at least for me, there's some difficulties to deal with the administrative stuff, like what you're doing.
Yes.
It's like, you like, for example, I love to stage, I love to coach, I love to produce performances or even competitions that VKIBC I have now. But behind that, it's just pure administration, which is very difficult, and it takes so much time that, and no matter how many people you have helping you, good team, at the end it comes to me, for example, like it will come probably to you, that you're responsible for an answer, yes and no, and you have to look from artistic point of view, or you have to end, or you have to look from administrative point of view. How do you deal with it?
Not easily. I will say that my personal mission with Paul Taylor's work is to get it performed and produced the way that it was intended, with his vision for it. So that doesn't always come with a standard price tag. The problem with business is that we have to commodify art. We have to put a price tag on it. But that price tag can be a sliding scale. So it does depend on what the company has, what the organization has, and whether or not the individuals have the skill set to perform the work as it should be done. So, you know, administering to it is also, as you know, programming. The choices that you make for the solos that will happen in VKIBC, you know, are important to show the dancers at their best, but also to challenge them. So that's why I said, I asked those questions at the beginning, why Paul Taylor? And I will help you find the right one. And that also may have to do with production. Like, how do we manage, like, oh, this company can't afford that, then maybe we should be looking at a different piece, right? It's too expensive in that set, or you don't have enough good male dancers or enough good female dancers. You know, let's try a smaller piece, let's do that. So the negotiation, anticipating the potential snags and pitfalls, I think is the first part of good management. The second part of it is just being clear in the agreements and the contracts that we have about all the potential things that might be a roadblock. But if we have it written down, then we can go to funders and turn around and say, this is part of maintaining the business. This is part of how we operate as a contributing part of society and our industry. Like, you know, because everything is measured on how do you contribute to the gross domestic product, right. You know? But that balance of wanting it to be done at its best potential for the performers, the companies, the stagehands, all of that is not always a bottom line, yet we cannot operate without that bottom line. So I don't know that there's a single answer, but I do know that I'm constantly looking at all of the factors. Where is the funding coming from? Do they have a large enough theater that would give them enough tickets, sales in order to get it? Can they charge that much? Do they have a sponsor? You know, and just taking a look sometimes at how they're budgeting for the costs that I know a production will take.